Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of The Chocolate Life Live. My name is Clay Gordon. I'm the creator and the moderator of TheChocolateLife.com, coming to you with The Chocolate Life Live twice a week on Tuesdays and Fridays. And today I want to welcome as my very, very special guest, Spencer Hyman, who's one of the co-founders of Cocoa Runners. Spencer, you're in London at the moment, I'm going to assume?
Yep, you can tell because it's dark and it's rainy and it's miserable.
Yeah, we have similar kinds of things. We're hovering around freezing for the last week or so and been wet most of that time. What I do want to remind people, whether you're watching live or you get a chance to watch this on replay, there is a comment section, whether you're watching on YouTube, LinkedIn, or in Facebook, and you can add questions live during the live stream. Boom. And if you're watching this afterwards, I do monitor all the questions and answers that get posted, and we'll make sure to follow up afterwards. And with that in mind, Spencer, I mean, you and I have known each other. Well, I did a little bit of research on my archive. We started corresponding around 2013, although we didn't meet in person. So Cocoa Runners in 2013 versus the Cocoa Runners of today, what was the original vision and what is it like today? And how does that match your original idea for what Cocoa Runners would become?
Well, first and foremost, thank you very, very much for having me on this. Thank you very much for your patience and everything else. And as you know, in 2013, even then, we were great fans and great admirers of everything that you do. So the backstory to Cocoa Runners is that back in sort of the late 2000s, early 2010s, Simon Pelthorpe, who's my co-founder, and I basically, through different means, both of us have been in e-commerce for quite a long time. And both of us basically thought there was an interesting opportunity in e-commerce to go after what we call curated commerce. And sort of let me unpack that, and then let me give you my love of chocolate and everything else after that in a sec. But Simon's background was that he set up buy.com over here in the UK. And at the same time, I was launching Amazon software, video games, electronics, and toy stores here in France, Germany, and a couple of other places. And what we both pretty rapidly discovered is that if the secret of physical retail is location, 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 the secret of e-commerce is search, search, search. E-commerce is based around the idea that you can sort of type something into a search engine box and you find it and then you go and buy it. But it sort of presupposes that you know what you want. Mm-hmm. It also basically pretty rapidly became a one-horse race. So even by the sort of late 2000s, people were already switching. If they knew they wanted a specific product, they weren't going to Google anymore. They were going to Amazon. And so that gave us an interesting sort of opportunity, which is that for stuff that you need advice, then I think you need basically DJs or curators. And another thing that I'd done in my past was that I'd helped set up something called Last FM, which before Spotify was the great sort of music service. In fact, all the stuff that Spotify does, we basically sort of came up with, including playlists. And if you think about it, the best form of discovery anybody's ever come up with for any form of media is basically radio for music. And so we basically said, we've got to figure a way to use this. Mm-hmm. And we both loved chocolate. And it was just as, at least in Europe, the craft chocolate revolution, or at least in the UK, perhaps to be more accurate, was just starting to take off. So as you well know, the first couple of guys in the UK are Duffy's and Willys. And literally, I think I was the first guy to place an order on Pump Street's site. And it was literally, when we started, there were like 2 or 3 people in the UK. Within a couple of years, we had about 10 or 15, and now there are probably over 100. And really what our aim is to do is to basically bring you the world's best craft chocolate once a month through a delivery service by which we send you 4 different bars. And we passionately believe in craft chocolate because we think it tastes better. It's a great way of getting people to eat more healthily. It's better for you. It's far better for farmers, far better for the planet. And I'm sure we can go into more about this as we go through. But the background story is it's basically because we saw the craft chocolate revolution and we saw this opportunity in e-commerce to do what we call curated commerce.
Right. So I want to do a quick break here at the moment and remind everybody, if you have a question for Spencer, go into the comments wherever you're watching the live chat replay on YouTube, or live chat, not the replay, live chat on YouTube, and enter in the comments. And if you just want to shout out where in the world you're connecting from, let me know in a comment and I'll get it up on the screen and acknowledge, because I know this isn't watched internationally, and love to have shout outs from everybody who's watching live. So Spencer, I don't know if we've had this conversation before, but early on in my career, I used to be a DJ, right? So I worked for a non-commercial FM radio station in Portland, Oregon. And so I understand, I understand radio as a mechanism for discovery of music, particularly. I had an enormous amount of fun over the course of the 3 years. And then part of my high-tech background is in the area of search. And I have actually worked on developing search engines for some people. So an interesting confluence in terms of our backgrounds. I think that I don't know that I'd ever discussed with you.
No, I didn't know that you'd done stuff in search. I did know about your music taste.
Well, my music taste is maybe a little bit different from the fact that I was on the radio. And I want to jump in and say hello to Ewald Rietberg, who's one of the half of the team that puts together Hinde and Vera Chocolate in Rotterdam. So thank you very much for Ewald for checking in. And then also
and thank them very much for that great chocolate, which we're selling. And thank them very, very much for that awesome chocolate, which we finally, after a few trials and tribulations of post-Brexit, brought in. And the great Catherine Labright, who is herself a curator and a book person.
Absolutely. I want to say, Catherine, thank you very much for connecting. And then Jillian. Do you know Jillian?
I don't,
Simon?
No, but I'm delighted that she's a good cook. My great fear at the moment is to be really candid. I'm delighted, Jillian, that you're a happy Quaker Oats customers, because at the moment, the Royal Mail is making our lives a complete misery. So I don't know if you're aware of this, Clay, but we're basically going back to the 1970s here in the UK with strikes galore. And at the moment, for us even to get something in the Royal Mail is taking us between 1 to 5 days. And then, so basically, we normally sort of advertise, the UK is very proud of the fact that we can basically, pack something and have it delivered the next day to you almost anywhere in the UK. And it's one of the reasons why actually Amazon loves the UK so much and why we launch video games there. But that's another story. But at the moment, we have a nightmare, which is that basically we ship something, our warehouse by the wonderful Sarah, Lucy and Becky are absolute superstars. But basically, then it takes the Royal Mail 48 to 72 hours even to acknowledge it in their systems. Ouch. So it's a bit of a tragedy. And we got strikes coming up.
Right. And then I also want to say hello to Barbie Van Horn, who's connecting from Seattle this morning. Barbie, it's good to see you. I'm sorry I wasn't able to make it to Seattle for the Northwest Chocolate Festival this year. I hope to be there next year. So, Spencer, I think, you and I have had this discussion, but at the heart, I think, of growing the craft chocolate market is an understanding of what craft chocolate is. And you and I have had this discussion on a number of occasions. But for the people who are watching, how do you go about and explaining to people what craft chocolate is, and perhaps differentiating it from what we might think of as industrial or confectionery chocolate?
Yep, that's a great question. And I think there's sort of two elements to pick up on there. One of which is, how do you grow the craft chocolate market? And then there's another one, which is, and you're right, the first thing is, how do you define it? So what we want to focus on is, we want to get people to savor chocolate as opposed to scoffing it. And we can talk more about what that means when we talk about flavor in a moment. But fundamentally, if you want craft chocolate, it should be all around the flavor. And the only way you can get great flavor is really by having great beans, which means you have to know where they come from. You have to know how they're being fermented. You have to know how they've been harvested. You have to know how they've been dried. Then you also have to know how it's been crafted. And that means you need to know who the maker is, what sort of roast they've used, what sort of grinding, conching, etc. And there are radically different approaches. So, a lot of mass-produced chocolate will not, actually ever even be fermented, and they don't really care about the beans, and it's all just a different blend. And when it comes to the making stage, as you well know, and as you've gone on many podcasts in many different places, often most chocolate makers actually don't make their own chocolate. They just buy in what we would call couverture, which is a bit like cooking at home with it, which is fine, but you should at least, if you go to a restaurant and someone serves you a microwave meal, you should let them know that's what you're going to get. And, the other tricks are things like nib roasting, which is something which, we don't really pay a lot of attention to in the craft chocolate world, because it would never occur to anybody to take their shells off a bean before you roast them. But if you do that, you get a bit more efficiency and you lose all the flavor. So our definition of craft chocolate is, we have to basically believe that they taste and have an amazing flavor profile, which I know we're going to talk about more in a minute. And then we also have to know where the beans come from and where the chocolate is made. And as a quick plug, I would say that one thing the craft chocolate industry needs to do more of, which the coffee world and, for example, the wine world do far better, is actually detailing this on the label. It doesn't work just to sort of say, well, we got beans from Ghana or we got beans from Ecuador. Nobody in the specialty coffee world would ever dream of doing that. They basically stick on the back of it, literally, the name of the father's grandmother and his granddaughter, if they possibly could do, as well as how many feet have trodden on this and that. And And there is something about, because big chocolate can't compete with that. So we sell over 1,000 different bars. We never sell a bar unless we know exactly where the beans have come from. And we never sell a bar unless we've virtually or in person gone round and met the maker and gone round the factory.
So I think that you've just made a really important contribution here, which is to talk about the nature of the selection and curation process. One might think curating, I mean, there are 42 things out there, and I'm going to pick 7 of those 42 based on some criteria that I put together. But you've said that your curation process is not just based on your team's assessment of the flavor of whatever it is that you're evaluating, but it's also based upon these other criteria that you want to feel that you have confidence in representing to your customers. So if somebody comes to you and says, here's a bar, and I the beans come from Costa Rica, but it's from this particular farm in Costa Rica, then there is a due diligence process that you're doing to help make sure that when you represent that this is in fact from this small farm in Costa Rica, that you can make that representation with confidence.
Yeah, that's what we would try and do. I mean, we already on the site, we've always basically done a profile of the maker, and we're now doing a profile of all the different farms as well, and all the different cooperatives that we work with. And the reason why this is so important is really simple, which is that if you want to basically help the farmers, and if you want to say, the average cocoa farmer in West Africa gets paid, if they're a man, less than 80 cents a day, if they're a woman, less than 30 cents a day. That's not enough to live on. It has all sorts of other problems. But the other thing which people forget is that cacao, requires a huge amount of water to grow it. So, an avocado is 300 liters to grow one avocado. To grow one chocolate bar, it's 1.5 to 2,000 liters of water. And that's fine if it's grown responsibly. So, take Costa Rica, if it comes from Malacu or somebody like that, they're basically making certain that it comes from the rainforest and the rainforest recycles it all. But if you're just going to basically go and get any old sort of, Tony's Chocolonely like West African cacao, it's basically very likely that stuff is basically coming from a rainforest which has been destroyed and deforested. And that's going to basically cause more stress on the water supplies, as well as more problems to do with, like how the rain comes down. I mean, it's pretty frightening, that sort of stuff. So yes, it's really important to do that. But also it's better for the consumers because you're going to get a better flavor.
So I'm going to do just a quick dive here and point out to everybody that you've got the homepage of the Cocoa Runners website on the screen at the moment. You don't need to write it down. For every single one of the posts, I produce a post on the live stream, a post on the Chocolate Life about the live stream, and there is a link to the Cocoa Runners website on the site here. So you don't need to write things down. You don't need to remember where they are. You can always go to the Chocolate Life and find the information that you're looking for. And if we bring something up during the live stream, I'll post it on the page. And so, I'm looking on the Learn About tab, and you've got Meet the Makers, Meet the Growers, and other things like that. So this is one of the places where people can find out more information. But I want to point out that Teresa, who's connecting from Georgia, said she's enjoyed her virtual time seeing and hearing contribution in Chocoa. And for people who weren't at Chocoa this year, Spencer and I were on a panel together. But let's talk about 2 things right now, because I think it makes a real sense to jump in here, is because Teresa mentioned virtually, we have these things called virtual tastings, and then you have this thing called the tasting wave. I suppose it's a tasting mat. And so I mentioned that even though I've known you now for close to a decade, we were both at the Chocolate Festival in Portugal in early October or middle October, and it was the first time I'd actually ever got to sit down and go through a chocolate tasting with you. So can you explain to me, how the chocolate tasting wave experience came to be, how you might differentiate it with other, so how is it different, if you can talk about it, from the way, for example, the International Institute of Chocolate and Cocoa Tasting talk about it, how it might be different from tasting with color? And I'm intrigued. I mean, I'm a big fan of James Hoffman, and I'm really interested in knowing, how his contribution led to what's going on here in the tasting wave mat.
Yeah, well, so thanks for that. So the quick background to it is, and I'll cover it in two different ways. I'll tell you about the virtual tastings, then I'll tell you about the specific tasting wave, and we can maybe use that to bridge into flavor. So, and to the stuff that we do with James. So the history is we've always done tastings. That's the best way. It's sort of, if you want to get people into craft chocolate, taste the difference, if you like. And we always did them in person, often actually at James's place, Prufrock, and different places. We'd sort of do them at coffee baristas, wine shows, and all that sort of stuff. But when COVID appeared, we thought, okay, we got a challenge here. And what we did was we basically adapted our tastings so that, and I think you've shown pictures of this before, so that we basically have either a family pack or a couples pack of 10 different chocolates, which we send to you. And you basically get those, and then you can dial in any Wednesday, anywhere in the world, to a Zoom, where we will basically talk you through the tasting. And the difference between this tasting and many other tastings is it's interactive. So we basically ask you for your impressions of the tasting and answer different quizzes and different things. But what we're trying to do in the tasting is basically give you a quick overview and explain to you not just how to taste, which I'll come back to in a minute, but also the history of chocolate. Mm-hmm. Because most people don't realize, even what chocolate grows on, like trees, and where it grows and how it grows and why it has different flavors, and a little bit about sort of, how did chocolate become a commoditized ingredient? But also, for example, how do you tell a craft chocolate bar from a mass-produced chocolate bar? What is the giveaway? Because it's not like a chicken nugget versus a roast chicken where you can just look at it and immediately get it. But the aim of the tasting is basically to have as much fun as you possibly can in an hour and a half, tasting lots of chocolate bars, interacting with lots of people, and also learning a bit about chocolate. And the aim really is that if you ever come to one of our chocolate tastings, you will basically win the next pub quiz, which has got anything to do about chocolate, because you will have so much information. And in fact, there's even a quiz at the end where you basically test your knowledge about, which countries grow both chocolate and wine, etc. But the essential bit to it is that we want to teach you about how to get into craft chocolate, how to taste craft chocolate.
Before you go into the tasting mat, what I want to do is I want to point out to people on the website, if they are interested in participating in one of these virtual tastings, if you go to the website under virtual tastings, there is a calendar, right? And you can go click on the calendar and register. And there's not just, it sounds like the casual thing that happens every Wednesday, but there are also very, very specialized master classes and advanced classes for people who want to know more. So,
and so for example, we do two basic tastings. We do a masterclass, which is the Welcome to the Revolution, and then we do an advanced one in taste and flavor. But then we also, as you said, at some point we'll get one with you. I'd love to do one with the Bean to Barstool guys on their beer one as well. We do them with James Hoffman. We're doing one with Square Mile at the end of January, where basically he will send out 3 of his coffees. We're going to send out 5 chocolate bars, and you'll taste along with us. We do them with the Wine Society over here in the UK and with Corny and Barrow too. So we do as much as we can. And you don't have to have the kit to participate. You can listen to the banter too. But the great thing is that it is also really good if you can taste along with us, because then you get more out of it.
But I would also argue, if I can, that even if I'm here in the US, and trying to get product from the UK to the US is going to be a challenge. I know that James does it regularly, and perhaps you guys do it regularly as well.
We do it every week. We do it. Literally, we send out a couple of 100 parcels a week to the US. So we know actually the US is easier than Europe at the moment. It's only in the last month.
Wow. Given Brexit tensions, that doesn't surprise me at all. But I think that there is value in just exposing yourself more and more to as you say, the banter, understanding the process and how other people do it, and internalizing it as part of your own process, and hearing what other people might have to say, even about chocolates that you're not familiar with, can go a long way towards just generally familiarizing yourself with what's going on. And so I would recommend that even if you don't have, sign up for one of these tastings and get a sense for them and say, yes, this is something that I'd like to do, and I'd like to invest the next bit of not just time, but also resources in getting chocolate and having it delivered to me.
And you can download this thing actually off the web too. So even if you don't have our chocolate with you, but we do send the chocolate everywhere around the world, and it shouldn't take more than a week to get.
So I've held this up and you've held it up. Please explain to people what this is.
Okay, so this is basically designed to get you to think a little bit about flavor and about savoring. And to
Can you hold it up?
Yeah, and Great. To stop you thinking about scoffing. So the key point is the wave. That's the sort of three key points to it. And the first key point is the wave.
Okay.
So
you can lower it now, Spencer. Thank you.
Okay. If you scoff, you're basically getting basic tastes, sugar, salt, and fat, which will all hit you incredibly fast. And that's the secret of mass-produced chocolate. It's something you can produce in a factory. The secret of craft chocolate is the same secret as you have in coffee or wine or any other great product, where you're trying to basically develop the flavors, the aromas, which only humans can detect with their mouths, because we're the only animals which can do retronasal olfaction, which we'll talk more about if you come to a tasting. But the essential point is that the way that flavor in chocolate or in wine or anything else develops is it takes a bit of time. It generally takes 5 to 15 seconds for the chocolate to melt in your mouth and start to release the aromas. Now, I'm not talking about the sweetness or the bitterness or even the astringency. Those are tastes or chemothesis. And what we want you to do is basically think about how those flavors develop. And they will develop differently for different people in different ways. So the initial flavors that you're going to get are from the heat, releasing the aromas in your mouth and basically sending the volatiles back through your olfactory system out through your nose. And the problem that most people have got with flavor is twofold. The first problem they've got is they don't know how to articulate it. It's literally on the tip of your tongue or on the tip of your nose, whatever you want to say. So, you sort of look at, the colors that you're wearing, Clay, or the pictures of the bars behind me, you can all see the different colors in one go. With flavor, most people don't have a vocab. And so what we've done here is just basically given you a crib sheet, so that if you're basically told, well, it might be a bit jammy, or it might be a bit soy sauce-like, or it might be a bit vegetable, you think, oh, actually, I can identify that. And one of the things we do in the tasting is encouraging you to articulate that and share it with other people. And the reason for that is because, unlike colors, which you can see lots of colors at the same time, with flavor, there is something which is called the Lang limit, which basically means that you can only detect 1 or 2, maybe 2 or 3 aromas or flavors at any one instant. So it really helps actually if other people share them with you. The other thing that happens with flavor is that the initial flavors that you get are from heat in your mouth. And then the next set of flavors that you get, I'm not sure I'm pointing the right way, I'm not. But anyway, the next set of flavors that you get are basically from molecules, or basically the enzymes in your saliva. Because we all have different salivary enzymes, you may not get the same flavors as other people. But anyway, putting all that stuff aside, the insight for this actually comes really from 3 people outside of Cocoa Runners. One is a fantastic philosopher called Professor Barry Smith, who is the professor of philosophy at London University. He does a lot of stuff in wine, lots of stuff with other people who we work with a lot. But the other 2 people come out of related industries. One is Rebecca Palmer, who is the buyer at Corney and Barrow, who is a brilliant wine taster as well as aesthete. And actually, she gave us in particular the thing that we often talk about now is when you taste a bar of chocolate, it's not just the upfront flavors, it's the balance, it's the length, it's the intensity, it's the complexity, what they call in wine blick. And if you look at the flavor wave that we've got here, you'll actually sort of see those here. And then the final person, of course, is James Hoffman. And in fact, actually, before this was a wave, we actually had a river, because that's what we sort of thought it was. But actually, the wave is a better way of explaining it in some ways. And again, it's James, because basically, when you get into the sea and you're about to go surfing, the first thing that you do is you get a feel for the power of the wave, and that's the sort of texture. And then as the wave hits you, that's the initial set of flavors and tastes. And then as you surf it, that's the balance, the length, intensity, and the complexity. But the aim of it is, the key bit is to savor and just to delight in the complexities, the differences between the different bars. And that's the fun thing. If we send you 10 different bars of chocolate, you will, by the end of it, actually have a pretty good idea of, how different chocolates can taste, different textures, and what you like and what you don't like.
I want to jump on that last point really, really hard because I have a slightly different approach. I use different language, and there's it's based on the notion of comparison. Our nervous systems are designed to be able to compare 2 things, not necessarily just to put something in our mouth and describe it. And the fundamental point that I make about the comparative system that I put together is that you quickly get to understand what you like and why you like it, so that when you put something else in your mouth, you have a reference in your mind, and you can say, oh, this is why I like it, or this is why I don't. And I think that because there's not the professional equivalent of Robert Parker or sommeliers in restaurants yet for chocolate. for most people, getting to that understanding of what they like, I think, is perhaps the most important aspect of learning the tasting process. I don't know if you agree with that.
Yes, I do, with one important caveat. I think you've made a couple of very, very important points there. I think one is the comparative. I mean, flavor and foods are best appreciated in pairings and in comparisons. I mean, we always tell people to have a couple of chocolates on the go at any one time, because that will bring out the nuances. You'll be able to differentiate them more, and it'll help you, as you say, identify which ones you like more and which ones you like less. The only thing that I'm not sure, there's some sort of interesting stuff around likes versus wanting, and whether or not wants are sort of set up by the taste buds in your stomach and likes are set up by the receptors for flavor and taste in your mouths. But I think the essential point I would say is that people actually like fast food. Fast food is designed to be liked. You know, what's the thing you want to have after a Pringle? Another Pringle. That's because human beings are pre-programmed to like stuff that is sweet, salty, and fatty. So I want people to really figure out how to savor too, but that's a sort of nitpicky point for what you've got there. I mean, I think, you know, what do you enjoy savoring? Because you want to take time on it. You know, there's a lot of work that's gone into it, but also it's better for you. And so
one of the ways I would characterize that, putting aside the better for you aspect of it, is that I make the observation that some chocolates reward attention and some chocolates don't. You know, some chocolates demand that you pay attention to them, and by paying attention to them, you are rewarded for that attention. And so I use a different language, you know, paying attention as opposed to savoring. But I think we're talking basically about the same thing.
I mean, I think that most people, when they're given, you know, if they're hungry and they're given a Twix or a Snickers bar, will like it, but they will scoff it too.
Right.
And so I just want to differentiate when flavor is artificially added in a factory and you treat the ingredients as commodities, from what happens in craft, which is that you are basically trying to take people on a flavor journey. I couldn't agree more. I also want to go really, really briefly and point everybody to this particular James Hoffmann video, because one of the things he does is he sort of does a bracket where he has two different coffees against each other, and then he discards one, and then there's another bracket where there are two different coffees. And so this comparative notion, having two different things and you're describing them in terms of how they are the same and different from each other. This is probably one of the best descriptions, other than my own, of course, I think, that I've seen anywhere online. And I'll put the link to this video onto the post for today. I can't recommend it more. I mean, and he does talk about how valuable he finds these comparisons to be. So, can I just say one more quick thing just before we go? I think one other thing, and it's again James and Bex, who we really have to thank for this. You asked a question about how does this differ from other methods. So most of the other flavoring tools are basically based around the University College Davis, which basically came out with the wine wave, I think in the 1960s, which is just a circle which has got different colors and different descriptors, which I think is really useful as a source of vocab and as a means to help you articulate it. But what it doesn't give you is this concept of going on the journey. And that's the essential point that you get with any great wine or any great coffee or any great tea or any great food stuff. Because basically scoffing foods are all about the immediate hit of sugar that you get from them or everything else. And it's that. So I think that's probably where this is a little bit different. And you're definitely doing the same sort of thing.
So many, many years ago, I mean, you know the name Ed Seguin. I don't know if you've met him in person. For people who don't know him, he, among other things, is one of the mouths behind the Cocoa of Excellence program. He's on the Heirloom Cacao Preservation Project program. And he was at Guittard for many years as a Mars Fellow, and is a master taster in many things. And I enjoy being in a room where Ed is describing what it is that he's tasting. Number one, he's eloquent. Number two, he's very animated in the way that he speaks. But he talks about the flavor wave in terms of an orchestra, which I think is for people who may not be, who are looking for other and analogies to use, that the notion is that you have this entire range of flavors, and at one point one of them is coming forward, and then it will come in, and then another one comes. And importantly, it's a geographic sense, because flavor is, you might have something that is high up in the nose or under the tongue, or it's in the back of the mouth, or it's a sensation, a trigeminal sensation like astringency. That thinking about these things not just as taking place over time, but taking place geographically, I think is an analogy which is worth exploring. Mine is a little more technical, in the same way I use the music term attack, decay, sustain, release. So we think about the way the chocolate, the flavor of the chocolate comes into your mouth, the way anyway, you get the idea. It's a very, very similar one. I want to do a quick reset. We're about halfway through the hour. I'm talking with Spencer Hyman, who's the co-founder of Cocoa Runners in the UK. We're talking about Cocoa Runners. We're talking about craft chocolate, and want to remind people, no matter where they're tuning in the world live, go into the comments and you can throw in a question for Spencer. And we do have a question, Spencer, from Mark and Yuri in Denver. You mentioned on your site there are other activities during the taste testing. You mentioned super tasters. Do you use the PTC test paper to test participant? What are some of the other activities?
Yeah, so for the deep dive, thank you very much. That's a really great question. For the deep dive, we do use the PTC sensors.
PTC stands for?
I'm not. So basically, it's a form of the prop test. What it's actually. So let me just step back. I probably thought something other. So basically, what happened in the 1920s and then again in the 1950s was that people started to understand how taste receptors worked in your mouth. And you have between 20 to 25 different ones for bitterness, for example. You have only 2 or 3 for sweetness. But the bitterness ones aren't the same for everybody. And there's one specific receptor, which I think is, we've got an article on it somewhere on the website, which I think is TASR38, but I think I've got that wrong, but it's more or less that, which basically not everybody gets. About 20% of women and about 15% of men, when they put this piece of paper in their mouths, basically want to spit it out and go as far away as they possibly can from it. Another 20 to 25% of people will find it pretty unpleasant. The rest of the people just don't know what the fuss is about. So it just tastes like paper to them. And it's because they lack this receptor. Before the advent of DNA testing, it was actually one of the ways that you could actually sort of try and look for paternity, because it is a hereditary characteristic, a little bit like the way that for some people, the taste of coriander reminds them of soap. It's that sort of a gene receptor. But we do use that test just to sort of explain this and explain a bit more. There you go.
Phenolthiurea.
Yeah. And there's 2. There's another one which is called the prop test. One of them that people are a bit skeptical about, but they basically both test for the same thing. A woman called Linda Bartoshuk wrote a lot about it in the 1970s. And there's a sort of correlation between the number of papillae you have on your tongue, and i.e. how many supposed receptors you've got and whether or not you've got this. But actually the term super taste is very misleading, because it doesn't mean that you've got a more refined palate or anything like that. What it really means is that there's this particular form of bitterness that you don't like. Generally, people who are receptive to this particular PTC or prop will hate smoking. And they also have a weird relationship with broccoli. But it's basically it's a very interesting sort of discovery. But back on the other stuff that we do, the big other stuff that we do is, because basically one of the great things about doing a tasting together with people is, you can get lots of people to express their views. The nice thing about doing a virtual tasting actually is that you can get everybody to express their views. So we use a service called menti.com, whereby literally every page you have the chance to interact with it. So every time you taste a bar, we invite you to give your impressions, and we try and get you to use the tasting wave. So you sort of say, what texture is it? What initial flavors do I get? What later tastes do I get? And because you can see other people doing it, you can do that too. And then there are quizzes the whole way through, just to stop people going to sleep and make them feel as if they're doing some other stuff too. And there is a quiz at the end that if you win, you get lots of chocolate. Any other suggestions as to what we could do to make it more interactive would be great. We do play with other stuff. When you get the box, one of the things which most people don't really understand is why there's a bunch of coffee beans in it. So we literally supply a bunch of coffee beans, come to the tasting to discover why this is a great way of experiencing 100%. But also there will be some Velcro stuck in the lid of the box, which we invite you to stroke at different times. Clay, you'd be fine because you've got a beard, so you can just basically, do.
And if we go and look very, very closely at the image, which is the featured image on The Chocolate Life for today, people will notice there's a piece of sandpaper. in the top of the image. And what you're doing is you're rubbing your fingers against the sandpaper as you're tasting and trying to discover how that might affect your impressions of what it is that you're tasting.
It's a cross-modal. Yeah. Basically, your sense of touch, because we associate different foods with different textures. If you touch something which is rough, or if you touch something which is smooth, if you're drinking or you're eating something, it may actually impact how you perceive it. And most people don't believe it until they actually do it. And it's also, if you ever go into a bar and you've got a beard or you've got some stubble, it's a great way of using it as a chat-up line too.
Well, and we know that the environment that we're in will affect what it is that we are perceiving. So aromas in the environment. So you need to be very, very careful, for example, about how you wash your hands, what you wash your hands with before you go into a tasting, because you can put your fingers up to your mouth and you're smelling soap, not chocolate, for example. And also, not only the kind of music you're listening to, but the volume of the music will affect your perception, as well as the lighting in the environment that you're working, that you're tasting in. All of these things will have an effect. And this is even before we layer on the fact that every single one of us has our own sense of taste. Every single one of us has our own sense of smell. Each of us was brought up in our own food cultures, and so have preferences, right? And flavor reference for some flavors. I mean, if you've never had, some forms of either Near Eastern, I'm talking about India, or Southeast Asian, you may never have tamarind before. And so if somebody puts a piece of chocolate in their mouth and they go tamarind, and you're going, I have no idea what that was before.
So I think that's another great thing though about the virtual tasting, is that it is a lot less. It's a bit like, Peloton versus going to a spinning class in a gym. It's a lot less, frightening, a lot less scary, and you can do it in the comfort of your own home and whatever you want to wear. But the other thing though is that, I mean, if you go to lots of tastings, one of the most irritating things, and wine I think is particularly guilty of this, is being told what you should taste. Mm-hmm. And one of the things we stress is that initially most people will get the same flavor impressions, because what's happening here is the aromas are being released by heat in your mouth. And you're right, different people will perceive them in different ways depending on everything. But what's very clear as well is that as you basically get further along, what actually happens is it's the enzymes in your saliva which break down the volatiles in the chocolate or the wine. And not everybody has the same enzymes in your saliva. So a great case in point, which the wine industry spent a long time looking at, is Sauvignon Blanc. So, if you've ever had that gooseberry sensation when you drink a Kiwi Sauvignon Blanc, that's the thiols being released. But it's actually only released for about 70-80% of the people, because you need a particular bacteria in your saliva to release it. So I would love to do this stuff on chocolate, but we haven't yet managed to figure it out. But we'll do it with Barry.
Yeah, no, I think it is fascinating to think about this. Just taste is a sensation. One thing that I know from research that was done at UC San Diego is that each one of the flavor receptors of your tongue is hardwired to different regions of your brain. And if you could do things like transplanting a bitter receptor onto a sweet receptor, and you will in fact have entirely different perceptions of what you're going. You can actually take a cone from your eye that is sensitive to blue and put it into a taste bud. When they shine blue light in your mouth, you'll taste something. Talking about modal taste reception. I'm sorry?
I didn't know that.
It's just really, really complicated. And what I want to do right now is bitterness, and this, I think it's interesting to know about bitterness, is bitterness in nature is often a sign of poison. And so if you have something which is very bitter, you may want to stay away from it, right? And also bitterness as a taste sensation, or not as a taste sensation, but our ability to taste bitterness changes as we age. So children tend to not like very bitter things. And as we grow up, hit puberty, we tend to get over or are able to work through our aversion to bitter things. As an adult, I need to know about bitterness because I don't want to serve poison to my children. I mean, there's this really complex, biological, his evolutionary component to bitterness and why it could be important from a tasting perspective.
Yeah, so astringency is similar. Astringency is, that drying sensation you get in your mouth. That's generally a sign that the fruit isn't yet ripe and ready to eat. Another quick aside on bitterness, just as a quick one. If anyone wants some good Christmas reading, there is a great book by a woman called Rachel Hertz, when she basically analyzes how bitterness and disgust are very closely related. What she basically does is that what she shows is that if you basically take a picture of somebody who looks disgusted, and then you take the picture of somebody who looks as if they've just eaten something very bitter, they look exactly the same. And her argument is basically that the sense of disgust comes from our sense of bitterness. It's a fun read. It's a great book. Rachel Hertz. I think it's called Disgust. I'm not sure it's still available in print, but you can definitely pick it up secondhand.
Well, I'm going to go take a look for it. I mean, I was just doing a little look up on it to see if I can
I'll
find
send it to you later.
Great.
As well as a voucher for everybody who's listened in to sort of join Cocoa Runners or something else.
That would be great if there's some sort of
yeah, we'll definitely do that. We should have talked about this before.
I appreciate that. So I want to do a quick shout out to Charlotte from Scotland, who's checking.
Hey.
You know Charlotte Flowers?
I go swimming regularly with Charlotte.
Okay.
So you have to ask Charlotte how cold the loch is.
Oh, Spencer, I mean, I spent part of my teenage years in Wellington, New Zealand, and I used to swim in the waters between the North Island and the South Island. So I know how cold it can get. I don't know the loch particularly, but I've been.
So she's in Aberfeldy Loch is where she swims.
Right. Well, perhaps what we can do is we can have a winter solstice gathering in 2023 where we all go, and instead of doing like the Coney Island polar bear swim that they do here, maybe 2 kilometers from where I live, we can do the Aberfeldy. It's
quite a schlep. You could all come to the ponds instead. We have actually had various. Well, Charlotte's swum in the ponds. Okay. And she's also, and she's been joined by the guys from Tossier, and the Chocolate people have been in the swims in the ponds, as have Mikkel Frisholm and Peter Svenningsson. So we've had a reasonable number of chocolate guys in the ponds. But Charlotte also swims and forages, which is really quite an achievement.
Gotcha. She says it's 7C, the water. That's cold.
So we're 5.7.
Okay. Anyway, not that, this sounds like a race to the bottom. Anyway, not necessarily want to go there. I want to do a quick shout out again to Ewald Rietberg, who says that at Hinde and Vera, they do occasionally nib roast, right? So they have a second stage roast for a few minutes at low temperature to roast out the tannins without losing the fruity flavors. And what I want to do is I want to say, yes, I think there are places where nib roasting can work. I think you need to be extremely careful. But when Spencer talks about nib roasting in an industrial setting, there is no way in what they're doing is they're focused on bringing out particular kinds of flavors. What they've done is they've done a very, very short high temperature roast to loose the shell from the beans inside. They're doing a crack and a winnow because it's much more efficient to crack and winnow it that way. Then they put it into a nib roasting, usually at high temperature. And what that does is it blasts off all the flavors that are in the bean. So I certainly believe that there are cases where nib roasting can be applied in a good way, but in an industrial setting, I don't know that it can. Spencer?
Yeah, I'm not quite sure if Ewald means that he's actually started by roasting in the shell and then takes the shell off, because
yes,
you said generally there are 2 ways that industrial does it. There's the way that you've described, and then the other ways is that they actually use high water pressure to take the shells off before they've even roasted them at all, in which case you really won't be able to keep any of the flavor in at all. But
absolutely. But if I can, so one of the ways in which I'm going to get to, Abel posed another question, and so I'm going to get to that. But one of the ways I think that I've sort of internalized the difference between a craft chocolate and industrial chocolate is that an industrial chocolate maker starts off with a destination in mind. Yeah. And so what they're going to do is they're going to take all of their ingredients, no matter what they are, and they're going to, in the manufacturing process, take those ingredients and then push them towards a specific flavor and texture profile. And they're looking for things, as you talked about, if you've had one Pringle, what do you want? Another Pringle. So there's this more-ish capability, element in what they're creating. You try some chocolate and your immediate thought is, I want to have some more, which is the antithesis of what I think of as craft chocolate, where the hands of the maker are in every batch and they're making creative decisions a la minute. right? They're working not towards a specific end, but they're working to reveal what it is that the beans might have in them. And so I think for me, that's a fundamental way of describing the differences between industrial and regular and industrial chocolate and craft chocolate. So Ewald has another one. What is the most striking difference in flavor perception between people you've come across during tastings? The most striking difference in flavor perception.
So this is not an answer to the question. One of the most interesting people to do tastings with is kids, because kids are dramatically more open to different varieties of flavor and much better than adults who've been brought up on Milky Ways and galaxies. But specifically, so there are some interesting cross-cultural angles. So, for example, vanilla is treated as a very, very different flavor enhancer in Asia to the way it is in the West, but that's not really what you're getting at. So if you mean in terms of likes and dislikes, I'm not sure that we've got those too much. The biggest insight we've got is the one about the kids. And then secondly, do not expect everybody to get the same flavor out of the bar as you do, because you will get the same initial sensations from the aroma being released in your mouth, because that's just heat, but you will not get the same flavors later on if you've got different enzymes, different bacterial microbiomes in your mouth to other people. But it's a really good question, Ewald, and I'm not sure that I've got a straight answer to it. I mean, it may be that we haven't yet pushed people hard enough to actually sort of give them stuff which is really out there, which some people like, some people don't like. Mm-hmm. But I don't know. One thing we're going to try and do next year, which will be really interesting to see, is we're basically going to give people, we're going to slightly change the format. We're going to have 3 chocolates, which you're actually going to know the names of. And then at the end of the tasting, you're going to get 3 chocolates, which are A, B, and C. And what we're going to try and get you to do is to see whether or not you made good enough notes of the first 3 chocolates and you can remember them well enough to actually go back and identify the other 3.
Very, very interesting. And I think that unexpectedly, you've segued into a point which I want to make, is that when somebody becomes a master of wine, for example, most of the work that is being done is training your taste memory, right? You put something in your mouth and you can go, oh, I've tasted this before. And then what you can do is you can retrieve and then articulate what it is you've done. So people think about super tasting and they think about it's an ability to be able to remember stuff. And as we discussed earlier, no, that's not what it's about. But training your taste memory is, I think, really what it is that these tasting programs, especially WSET programs in wine, are focused on doing. Right, that if you have never tasted something before, you cannot recognize it. So if you're in a group, other people may recognize that flavor, and you can now go squirrel it away in your brain. So hopefully, the next time you taste it, you'll be able to retrieve it. But for me, answering the question, it's about having confidence in your sense of taste. I mean, there are some people who, through experience or some other means, are able to, even if they're wrong, are able to articulate confidently what they taste. And there are some people who are very hesitant. And so I find these 2 very different groups of people in the tastings that I run. I don't know if you find the same.
Yeah, no, I do. I mean, I think you're right. I mean, WSET or the Masters of Wine, I mean, it's a bit Sherlock Holmes-like. You're right. It's basically about having a taste memory, but also having a Wikipedia so that you know that this particular set of flavors are going to be associated with this part of this wine. I mean, they do also use, the wine industry also is unabashedly, a fan of also using, color and also, the legs of it. And also they've got one thing which we don't have, which is I think they've done the primary, secondary, tertiary, what you get from the vineyard, what you get from the winemaker, what you get from the bottle. We don't really have that approach to break down the different flavors and colors and aromas of the wine. With chocolate, one thing I find is it's very difficult. Whenever we basically put a bar in a box, and Eval will know this, that we basically will taste it 4 or 5 times before we finally decide which one of the maker's bars that we're going to go with, because they do evolve and they do taste differently on different days and in different ways. And partly I think that's like when you open a wine, it takes a bit of time to breathe. And I think there's something in chocolate there, but we haven't really sat down and thought it through, or done the work on it, done the science on it.
Mm-hmm. No, there's, we talk about being 20 years behind beer and 40 years behind wine, and in some respects, I would agree with it. But I would also say that wine and beer and spirits and other things, balsamic vinegar and oils, had traditions of connoisseurship dating back hundreds, if not thousands of years before the Industrial Revolution. And the chocolate that we know of today, right, is a product of the Industrial Revolution. And there was never this culture, right, of chocolate appreciation and connoisseurship. We basically started inventing it in the 1980s. And so, yes, there are ways in which we are 20 or 30 years behind, but there are other ways in which we are hundreds, if not thousands of years behind in terms of, paying attention to these kinds of things. It's just a very, very different world that they exist in. A couple of quick comments. This one from Abel: Charlotte makes the best blueberry chocolate ever with our Bali. Okay. Catherine says, and then we have to taste Charlotte's fermented wild garlic chocolate. Have you had the fermented wild garlic chocolate, Spencer?
I think I've had it. Charlotte will have to tell me whether she brought it down the last time she was there. I have to say, Charlotte's filled chocolates are just amazing. And I'm delighted that she's using Eval's chocolate. I'm delighted that Charlotte is just an amazing chocolate maker. Big shout out. And if she's got any chocolates, get them for your Christmas present there too. Can I go back to one other quick thing, though, that you sort of said about the differences between chocolate and wine and everything else?
Sure.
And I think it goes back to a little bit your point about the 1980s. I mean, so one of the questions that you and I have often batted around is that, why is it that, take these as ballpark figures, you can argue about them, but they're directionally accurate. Specialty coffee is about 20% of all the coffee sold in the States or in the UK. Craft chocolate is less than 0.002% of all the chocolate sales in both places. And sort of, you've got to sort of say, well, why? And I think that one of the biggest reasons is that we're not a simple upgrade. And another is that we don't really have an occasion. So what I mean by that is that, if you want to have a meeting with somebody, and you want to impress them, you don't go to a Starbucks, you go to a Proof Rock or a Colonna's. Similarly, if you go to a pub or a bar and you want to impress somebody now and you drink beer, you probably don't have a mass-produced beer, you have some sort of like punk IPA. But we are not a straight substitute for a Mars bar. And interestingly, Charlotte is much smarter on this, because Charlotte's, for example, her filled chocolates are definitely a substitute for all the other junk stuff out there from bits of Europe that we won't mention. But in general, we ask all of our makers 2 questions when we first sort of bring them on. And it's difficult to get good answers to either of them. One of which is, why do you make bars as opposed to any other format?
Right. And
the other one of which is, what time of day do you think people eat your chocolate? And the bar one is, well, that's what we've always done, and that's the best way to sort of get the flavors out, which is fair enough. But the time one is, they sort of sit back and think about it, and most of them will say, well, a lot of the time people have it after a meal at the end of it. That's very different to when you have a Mars bar or a Twix or anything else, which is, as a little pick-me-up in the afternoon, or you get it out the vending machine, or you get it from the corner shop or whatever. And I think we still have to find our occasion. And, it's the savoring moment. When is it? Who's it with? What do you need to do it with? And that's I think, one of the big opportunities or challenges.
Well, I certainly think that it is part of the rubric that needs to be solved in terms of helping to grow the craft chocolate market. It was a question that I was going to ask you, because this is something that you mentioned in every single presentation that I've seen you give, which is one of the differences between chocolate and all these other things which I mentioned, is that every single one of them has not just one, but multiple occasions where we expect to be able to consume them, right? And we don't have anything like that in chocolate.
And those occasions are generally social, so you can spread the love, share the love. And there's also generally on hand some form of curator. So if you go to a specialty coffee store, there's going to be some bearded barista with a large number of tattoos telling you all about the farmer's wife who's basically, roasted.
And it's one of the reasons why I say to people, if you want to buy chocolate, go to a specialty chocolate shop, not to the corner convenience store, right?
Yeah.
Because what you can do is you can walk in and say, I don't know what any of these things are. You can look at the person and you can say, help me with the decision, which is exactly what the barista analogy does.
Yeah.
If you're not interested, why you might want to try a Kona coffee as opposed to a Jamaica Blue Mountain, assuming both of those are on the menu, right? The barista will be able to say, what sort of things do you like? Here's what they are. And they can help you, craft the drink, which is perfect for you. And manufactured a la minute, this is another place in which chocolate is different from coffee. In general, we aren't crafting things a la minute. Although Catherine asks an interesting question. Do you think that hot chocolate could help with this?
That's a great question. And I think hot chocolate would really, I'm really intrigued by how hot chocolate will move. In Australia, it already is helping a bit there. In Australia, in the UK, the numbers I have are the number of people who drink hot chocolate in a coffee store is less than 2 or 3%, whereas in Australia, it's normally north of 10%. Which I think is an interesting insight. I think that, there are some people doing some interesting stuff with hot chocolate here in the UK. I think it should help. I think, good places to go and drink hot chocolate would be great because the baristas can tell you more about it. And I think it should be done. I think you've got to think a little bit about the format. So I think what should be done with it is that you've got to think differently about what are you going to do in the summer, because it's much less likely that people would drink hot chocolate in the summer. You're definitely on something because.
But that's cultural. But that's cultural. If I go to Colombia, they're drinking hot chocolate every day. 365
breakfast with cheese,
and often at breakfast with cheese. They have their custom. They have their occasion. If you go right next door to Ecuador, there's no similar kind of culture of chocolate consumption. I was in one of the fanciest hotels in Guayaquil, and I walked into the coffee shop and I asked them for hot chocolate, and they immediately walked back and took a scoop of powder that was industrial with lots of sugar and other kinds of things, and I'm going, thank you, I want something which is more comida típica than something which is industrial. But you're right. I think it's a fabulous question, and I think also the notion of, well, that makes sense for part of the year, perhaps. But when we get into the middle of summer, although people drink a lot of hot coffee in the middle of the summer.
They do, but that's because they want a caffeine hit. The other thing is that the addictive stuff in chocolate, unfortunately, is sugar.
Is the sugar.
Beer is booze. And,
right. No, absolutely. Another quick comment here, just from Clement, who has been a Chocolate Life member for as long as I can remember, who's connecting in from the island of Tobago, part of the Trinidad and Tobago. I visited. Have you been to Trinidad, Spencer? Had a chance to go?
No, I really want to go and see all the guys out there. Dwayne is awesome.
Yeah, great stuff. And then finally, Mark, who is a colleague here in the Northeast of the United States, comments, until watching the live stream, I couldn't comprehend why my enjoyment of a particular chocolate changed from time to time. Understanding the variations in saliva content and enzymes, right, could make that clear. Also mood, time of day, all of these things have an effect. The last thing that you ate, whether you brushed your teeth, which will affect, obviously, the enzymatic content of the saliva, right? All of these things.
It makes a big difference. We've got a couple of articles on it too. There's one which is called Sipping and Slurping. Sipping and Slurping. I will get it right eventually. But,
all right, so these we'll find out about. So
you can learn about. Well, if you just put slipping and slurping in.
Well, I should just be able to
sipping. You just put sipping.
Slurping?
Yeah, so you go to pages down at the bottom left.
Savoring, slurping, spitting, and saliva.
Yeah, it's in there. And basically, there's Tampopo up at the top. So basically, hats off. If you haven't watched the movie Tampopo, it's just the best movie on Japanese food all over the place. But that's got some of it, and there's some other articles we've written about it too. It's a good topic. But it is also the fact the Lang limit is the other thing to remember. Is just that you only get. It's not like color. You only get 2 or 3 flavor sensations or aromas. Even perfumers can't pick up more than 1 or 2 sensations at any one time.
Gotcha. So we're at the hour, Spencer. I'm going to give you a couple of seconds. I'm going to do a little quick just recap what's going on. So this is the Chocolate Life Live. My guest today has been Spencer Hyman, one of the co-founders of Cocoa Runners. And we have been talking about tasting chocolate, craft chocolate, the work that Cocoa Runners in the UK does. I want to remind everybody, you're looking right now at the homepage of TheChocolateLife.com. And for every single one of the live streams, I put together a unique post. And on this post, you'll find links to resources. So there is a link to the homepage of the Cocoa Runners website. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a direct link to this this article.
We'll give you a voucher too. If you put Clay 15, or if you want to put whatever you want, you tell us whatever you want, and we'll basically come up with a discount code for you.
Right, and I'm trying to think of the best way to distribute the discount code. So what I will do, unless you don't mind that everybody in the world gets it.
I don't mind. I mean, we'll put it up.
So what I'm going to do,
it'll only be for a limited period of time. So
right. So if you want to give me a discount code and just do TCL for the Chocolate Life,
so TCL 15, and it'll be valid for the next 7 days.
Okay. So if you're watching this live stream between now and the 13th of December, that if you go to the Cocoa Runner website and type in TCL 15, you'll get a 15% discount on anything.
We'll make it for the first 500 people too, just so it doesn't go get too abused.
Right. So I will make that note on this page, and also we'll let everybody know, of course, that 15% discount does not also in amount attached to shipping. So shipping will be whatever shipping is. So Spencer, I mean, it is just been a huge pleasure. We've been talking about this for longer than I care to admit. I'm glad that we had an opportunity to do it. I hope that we have an opportunity to do this again on different. So I think it's really great. I would love to schedule if we can, and I think this would be interesting things. Let's put together just a Chocolate Life virtual tasting. We'll
that would be amazing.
Who wants to do it, and we can talk about that kind of stuff. You and I will talk about that, and we'll schedule.
We'll co-host it. We'll do it together.
We'll schedule it for the new year.
We'll basically probably do it so that it's one of the standard kits, but we'll do it in a different way.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Because then if people can't come, they can come to the other ones too.
Absolutely. I think that makes an enormous amount of sense. I'm looking forward to doing that. And a big thank you from Mark and Yuri. Thanks they'll sign up for a tasting. They want to sign up for the virtual tasting. They were also part of my 20th anniversary tasting. And Mark says, thank you very much. Spencer, you got a last minute thing you want to sign off with today?
Just thank you very much, Clay. I mean, honestly, thank you very much for all that you do. I mean, I passionately believe in craft chocolate. I passionately am incredibly grateful for all that you do to help it. So thank you so much.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you very much. I think that one of the great things about being in this world is that there are lots of people who are passionate about this, and we're all passionate about it in different ways. I think that for growing the future of craft chocolate, we need to agree upon some language and some things that we can all agree on. Because if we're confused about what craft chocolate is, it's no wonder that consumers are confused about it. As Big Chocolate appropriates phrases like bean to bar and even craft, it's the messaging and the languages we use, the way we teach people about it. There needs to be some consistency, and this is something that you and I have discussed about working on, so that we can help people not only educate themselves, but to be able to help other people understand why craft chocolate is an important aspect for the future of chocolate. And with that, again, Spencer, thank you very much for being here today. And I want to remind everybody, as I do every time I sign off, if you're working with chocolate and you're not having fun, you're doing it wrong.